I am in Fremont, Ohio at the Rutherford B. Hayes Center. This is the home presidential library and grave site of the 19th President of the United States. Actually, the presidential library over here is the very first presidential library and museum in the country. So this is going to be pretty awesome. Let's go check this out. The Hayes Presidential Library and the Hayes home are located within very close proximity of each other here on the wooded Spiegel Grove estate. Once known as Spiegel Grove State Park, there are several areas to see on the property, and you can even take a horse-drawn wagon ride around the estate, which I opted not to do because it costs extra. But at the moment they have resident Clydesdales here, which is really cool. First, we'll take a look at the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library and Museum. As I mentioned, this was the first presidential library and museum, built in 1916 by the state of Ohio. The presidential eagle seals with naval motifs on the gates are really awesome. This is the original grand entrance to the library, which is no longer used. The library was built to hold the 12,000 volume personal library of President Hayes, as well as other volumes of historical newspapers and journals from the Civil War, all the way up to World War I when this opened. Even though the president had been dead for quite a while by the time this was built, they do have an honor roll on the building with the names of Fremont men who served in the Spanish-American War and the Great War. This Art Deco facade was added in 1922 and is now the main entrance to the museum. While this was the first presidential library, it was not and still isn't an official presidential library. The official presidential library, sanctioned by the National Archives and Records Administration, started with FDR's in 1941 and have been made for all succeeding presidents, his predecessor Herbert Hoover, and they are guaranteed for future presidents. While not an official presidential library, this state-run facility has an amazing collection on display in its expansive museum. The first exhibit we'll look at is actually beneath the central memorial room of the library, and it houses an old-school collection of military memorabilia and artifacts, most of which was collected by the Hayes family, particularly by Colonel Webb C. Hayes, the president's second son. This was a British cannon captured during the War for Independence. I really like this antiquated display of the cannon and the painted cannonball. Here are some artifacts from the American Revolution and the War of 1812, including some caps, buckles, a canteen, and some rifles. This is a British mortar captured during the War of 1812. That is a bear trap that was gifted to President Hayes by the Oneida community. They were an experimental perfectionist religious communal society, and its founder was the president's cousin. Here's a collection of 19th century rifles and sabers. These are Union and Confederate weapons from the Civil War, Springfields, revolvers, cavalry sabers, and more. These are all artifacts from the 1900 Boxer Rebellion, which occurred when a secret Chinese organization led an uprising against Western and Japanese influences. The Boxers killed Christian missionaries and destroyed foreign property in China, and began besieging the Foreign Legation District of Beijing to kill diplomats. Due to these events, the United States joined a force of 20,000 troops from 7 other nations to stop the rebellion and secure their relations and trade with China. Among the very interesting weapons in here is this Chinese gingle, which is 9 feet long and it had to be operated by 3 men. You rarely see mention or even relics from the Boxer Rebellion in American military museums. This museum has so much because Colonel Hayes was among those sent to put down the Boxer Rebellion. This is a Chinese cannon that was presented to Colonel Hayes by a group of Russians who captured it near the walls of the Forbidden City in Beijing during the Boxer Rebellion. This is a Chinese mortar captured at the Chinese arsenal at Tianjin by Americans during the Boxer Rebellion. These artifacts were collected by Colonel Hayes while stationed in the Philippines from 1899 to 1900, shortly after the United States took over from Spain, and during the Philippine insurrection. There were some very unique and scary swords made in the Philippines. Filipino swords are usually curved and wavy, and you also don't see many of these in American military museums, so very cool. This is a double-barreled Philippine lantaka, or swivel gun. It was likely presented to Colonel Hayes by the Moro chief in 1899. This is the capstan and worm drive shaft of the USS Maine, collected by Colonel Hayes for display in this museum. The violent explosion and sinking of the Maine in Havana Harbor precipitated the Spanish-American War, and it was a huge ordeal back then. The capstan was used to raise and lower the ship's anchor, while the worm drive shaft held the gear arrangement. This cannon was captured during the Mexican-American War. That is a Chinese swivel gun captured at Tianjin during the Boxer Rebellion. And that is a Chinese mortar, one of the earliest types developed by the Chinese, which apparently emitted a suffocating gas when fired. This was the bell of the USS Spiegel Grove, LSD-32. The US Navy ship was christened in 1955 and named after the home of President Hayes. Here's a collection of varying sizes of bullets and cartridges. And here's a display on General George Crook of Ohio. He was an important general during the Civil War and the Indian Wars of the 1870s. He was also Hayes' original commander during the Civil War, but they later became very good friends. This was General Crook's Sharps .45 caliber buffalo gun, his favorite hunting weapon. He left it to Webb Hayes when he died in 1890. And this was his single-shot Winchester rifle, which was made specifically for the general. Finally, a 6-pounder field gun from the Civil War. That was a very distinctive old family military collection. I really enjoyed that exhibit. Now we move on to the life and times of President Rutherford B. Hayes. This is a part of the Hayes Tavern, built and operated by President Hayes' grandfather in 1789 in Brattleboro, Vermont. When the tavern was going to be destroyed in the 60s, this section of paneling, flooring, and some artifacts were recovered and reconstructed here in the museum. This cradle belonged to the president's grandmother, and it was the cradle used by the president's father, Rutherford Hayes Jr. This grandfather clock was purchased by the president's father when he married Sophia Burchard in Vermont in 1812, and when they moved to Ohio in 1817, they couldn't fit the clock in their wagon, so it was left behind. But it got back into the Hayes family nearly 100 years later. Rutherford B. Hayes was born in Delaware, Ohio on October 4th, 1822. I have been to the birth site. The house was destroyed and a gas station was built on top of it, but they do have a monument there, and they have since erected a statue of the president there, so I need to get back. Here are some items related to his parents and upbringing, as well as his uncle and guardian, Sardis Burchard, who became the first banker here in Fremont. This was the Masonic apron of his father. The president was not a Freemason, but he was a member of the Odd Fellows. These are sad relics. They were the ice skates of Rutherford B. Hayes' 9-year-old brother Lorenzo, who was wearing them when he drowned in a skating accident in 1825. Rutherford left home to attend the Norwalk Seminary at the age of 13. He later went to Kenyon College and then Harvard Law School. There's a miniature portrait of him and his first vote cast in Cambridge, Massachusetts in 1844. He voted for president his personal hero Henry Clay, who lost, again. And that is Hayes' Harvard diploma. He was admitted to the Ohio Bar in 1845 and opened his first law office here in Fremont, which was then called Lower Sandusky. He wouldn't stay here too long though. He would move around to New England, Texas, and then settle into a practice in Cincinnati. But during that time, this town got its first hand pumper, built in 1851 for putting out fires. Hayes met Lucy Webb on the campus of Ohio Wesleyan Female College, where that plate is from, and this ballad is from when he first ran for elected office as the Cincinnati City Solicitor in 1859, which he did win. Hayes joined the Literary Club of Cincinnati, a highly exclusive elitist club which still exists today. Hayes got to meet his favorite author, Ralph Waldo Emerson, when he visited the club. That is the Hayes' marriage license. Rutherford did think he was too old for Lucy as he was 9 years older, but really that was very common back then. That is Lucy Hayes' engagement and wedding rings. They also have Lucy Webb Hayes' wedding paraphernalia, including her wedding dress, worn on December 30th, 1852, when they wed at her mother's home in Cincinnati. This dress was displayed during their 25th anniversary celebration at the White House in 1877. Lucy also wore these stockings and shoes during the wedding. This was Lucy's portable desk, given to her as a wedding present. As Rutherford explained it, he handed the Reverend a $20 gold piece for performing the ceremony, and the Reverend gave it back to him and told him to buy something nice for Lucy, so he bought this desk. How kind. Here are some artifacts from Ohio Wesleyan Female College. Lucy was the first lady to have a college degree, and that is her diploma right there. Lucy's father was Dr. James D. Webb of Chillicothe, Ohio, and there's his lancet used for bleeding patients and his pocket watch. That's Lucy's mother's sampler, lockets of her hair, and the doctor's cane. This was Rutherford Hayes' law desk when he practiced in Cincinnati during the 1850s through the time of secession and the Civil War. When the southern states started seceding, Hayes was tolerable with the South leaving the Union since the regional differences were so great. However, a Democratic resurgence in the border city of Cincinnati kicked him out of his city solicitor seat, and once Fort Sumter was attacked, he decided to join the 23rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry, right alongside future President William McKinley. That is a fragment of a flagstaff of either the 12th or 23rd South Carolina Regiment, captured at the Battle of South Mountain. The color bearer who was holding this did escape. He tore off the flag and left the staff, which the 23rd Ohio turned into souvenirs. This is a running hound knife, kind of like a Swiss combination pocket knife, that was carried by Hayes during the war. This was the sword of Captain James Botsford of the 23rd Ohio. He broke his sword while fencing another officer in their camp, so he had made it into a dagger and gave it to 6-year-old Webb Hayes, perhaps the beginning of his awesome collection in the other room. That was Hayes' drinking cup during the Civil War. And these are some of his training books. Like many Civil War volunteer officers, he had no military experience, so these were helpful. On the left is the hat insignia of the 23rd Ohio, and on the right, the shoulder straps of their leader, General George Crook. He presented these shoulder straps to Colonel Hayes when he was promoted to general. And this was General Hayes' Smith & Wesson .32 caliber revolver. They also have the General's sword and scabbard. He was promoted to the rank of Brigadier General, which he was reluctant of, on October 19, 1864 due to his valor at the battles of Shenandoah Valley, and this certificate of his promotion was signed by President Andrew Johnson on April 18, 1865, a mere 3 days after Lincoln's death. Hayes was severely wounded at the Battle of South Mountain in September of 1862, so when Lucy got word, she went east and spent over a week trying to find him. Once she did, she helped Rutherford recover at a field hospital. When Rutherford went off again, Lucy decided to stay in the area and help nurse other wounded soldiers, which was emotionally draining and very gruesome work. Soon after the war, Hayes ran for Congress and was sworn in as a representative in December of 1865. This was the congressman's franking stamp. Congressmen were allowed to mail official correspondence for free back then. Looks like he would often use a facsimile signature for his official work. Hayes actually ran for Congress with the National Union Party, a coalition of Republicans and Democrats who supported the Civil War. He resigned from Congress in 1867 to run for governor of Ohio, on a Republican platform which did include equal rights for black Ohioans. He served 2 terms as governor and retired in 1872. As governor, he received this elaborate boxwood cane from an admirer from New York. He made it during the time he was running for president and hoped to carve 19th president into it, but because the outcome of that election took so long to figure out, he just gave it to Hayes without knowing whether he'd be president or not. Hayes was out of politics for 4 years before Republicans wanted him to run for a 3rd term as governor in 1875, which he did and won. And that immediately made him a top candidate for the Republican ticket for the presidency the following year, and he was surprisingly nominated at the convention over James G. Blaine, running with William Wheeler of New York as vice president. Don't worry, Hayes himself didn't know who Wheeler was either. This was Lucy Hayes' needlework box. She did lots of sewing, and the pocket watch of her daughter Fannie Hayes. This fancy silk and velvet coat was worn by the First Lady during the White House years. It was made in Paris. The First Lady wore this dress at a New Year's Day reception for the Diplomatic Corps in 1878. During the Hayes presidential campaign of 1876, they took time to visit the Centennial Exposition at Fairmount Park in Philadelphia. a wondrous World's Fair celebrating the 100th anniversary of the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So they have some souvenirs and relics from the exposition on display, including a rare Centennial Exposition silver medal made from Nevada ore. By the way, the man who proposed the exposition was Dr. John L. Campbell, a professor of astronomy, philosophy, and mathematics at Wabash College. The election of 1876 was a very complicated and controversial one. The Democratic nominee was New York Governor Samuel J. Tilden, who was very popular. Hayes had to campaign with the fact that Republicans had long been in power by then, so they were receiving much of the blame for Grant's cabinet's corruption as well as economic hardship across the country. So even Hayes thought he would likely lose, which he kinda did. As votes were tallied, Tilden carried most of the South, the critical swing states of New York and Indiana, as well as Connecticut and New Jersey. Tilden did unquestionably win the popular vote and claimed 184 electoral votes, just one short of a majority back then. So Republicans decided to challenge the results of the election by charging Democrats with fraud and voter suppression of blacks in Florida, Louisiana, and South Carolina, which if successful, would give them the Electoral College. It became further complicated after Election Day, with electors disqualified and debate about which person or House of Congress could decide on the electors. So a bipartisan Electoral Commission was created, and the Republicans on it decided to award the 20 votes Hayes needed to him, so the Democrats were outraged and filibustered. Immediately before Inauguration Day, Republican and Democratic leaders met at Wormsley's Hotel to negotiate and settle the election. Republicans agreed to make concessions if Democrats would agree to the committee's decision. A huge and consequential concession being that Hayes would withdraw federal troops from the South and accept Democratic governments in the southern states, effectively ending Reconstruction and leaving the new rights and liberties of freedmen to white Democrats, ushering in a long era of terrible oppression and Jim Crow. This is interesting. You can see the voting eligibility requirements in 1876. I couldn't because of my age, you had to be 21, but it appears that the majority of visitors could not have participated. The compromise on March 2nd of 1877 did allow for Rutherford B. Hayes to be sworn in as the 19th President of the United States. His fraudulency took the oath of office privately on March 3rd in the Red Room of the Executive Mansion, then they did a public inauguration on March 5th at the Capitol. This is a piece of the board that Hayes stood on while being sworn in as President on March 5th at the public inauguration, during which he tried to soothe the tensions of the complicated election. I wish they still made relics like this for modern presidents. And this is the Bible that President Hayes used when he took the oath of office. His hand rested on Psalm 118, verse 11. Here are some artifacts from his tenure as president. He did pledge to be a one-term president, which he followed through on. There is his coat and vest. He actually wasn't very tall, 5'8", and he had relatively simple taste in fashion, but he did wear these gloves sometimes. And there are the president's boots. The miniature cannon was presented to the general now president by the Ohio Commandery of the Military Order of the Loyal Legion, and there's a model of the infamous USS Monitor he received in Philadelphia. There's a tin type of Lucy that Rutherford carried in his pocket for most of his life, as well as a program from the Lucy Hayes Memorial Service in her childhood hometown of Chillicothe after her passing in 1889, and a bracelet Rutherford purchased for Lucy. First Lady Hayes wore this dress for White House receptions between 1877 and 1881. As First Lady, she advocated for African American rights and was the first to invite African American musicians to perform at the White House. She was also known as Lemonade Lucy due to her support of temperance. Alcohol was banned at the White House during the Hayes years, but that was done by order of the president. These are costumes of the Hayes' children, their youngest son Scott, and their daughter Fanny. They wore these at a White House ball on March 11th, 1880. You can view a typical White House meal during the Hayes administration. The 13th course may have been fried cheese sticks. This is a taxidermied barn owl that was captured alive inside the Washington Monument in 1879. The monument was still under construction during this time, and he was found hanging on a plumb line, causing it to shake and scare the engineers. When the owl died, he was taxidermied and presented to the president. Here are some more personal articles of Lucy and Rutherford Hayes, including her perfume bottle, his matchbox, cufflinks, a card case, and Lucy's purse on the left. Here are some gifts received by the President and First Lady, including an anonymous mail-sent hatchet. You probably couldn't do that now. A photograph cylinder, a copper box from the Centennial Exposition, a letter opener, pincushion, and a bowl made by the Haida people of the Northwest. Now this ring is incredible. It is filled with the hair of General George Washington. The first president himself gave it as a gift to Eliza Hamilton, the wife of Alexander Hamilton. Eliza would later give it to her son, who didn't get killed in a duel, James, and he would later give it to Lincoln's personal secretary and later Secretary of State, John Hay. John Hay then gave this ring of President Washington's hair to President Hayes in 1877. That is a well-connected ring. The amazing landscape artist Albert Bierstadt was quite popular by the Hayes era, and he was invited to spend a week at the White House in 1878. Bierstadt entertained the First Lady and her friends with a lesson in creating butterflies, by painting one half of the butterfly and then folding the paper to create the other half. The one on top was made by Bierstadt himself, and the little one below it was made by the First Lady. This big mahogany sideboard was used at the White House. It was located inside the private dining room. Displayed on it is some Hayes-era china. Lucy Hayes surveyed the White House china of past administrations and determined that there were not enough dishes, so she had a new whole set of china created instead of buying more. She had over 60 custom designed pieces featuring American plants made for the White House by 1880. This is the first Morgan silver dollar, struck in 1878 at the Philadelphia Mint and presented to the president. The US stopped minting silver dollars in 1873, but resumed in 1878 after the Bland-Allison Act was passed over Hayes' veto. As the Indian Wars continued out west during the Hayes administration, including the Nez Perce War, Hayes and Interior Secretary Carl Schurz pursued a policy of assimilation in regards to Native Americans, which did in time lead to the Dawes Act of allotment and reservation land and industrial boarding schools, which in many ways turned out to be very bad. In 1880, Hayes embarked on a 71-day Great Western Tour with General William Sherman, who organized the trip. This map shows the vast route and the many stops across the western United States. This is an invitation from when Hayes stayed at the Palace Hotel in San Francisco during the trip. Later on, fellow Ohioan President Warren Harding would die there. And there's a totem and more Native American pottery gifted to Hayes. Lucy Hayes was given the gold nuggets on the left. They were dislodged when she detonated a 25,000-pound charge at the Spring Valley Hydraulic Gold Mine in California. And the silver brick on the right is from the Lincoln Mine, which was gifted to the First Lady during her visit to Lake Valley, New Mexico. Here are even more presidential gifts. Presidents do tend to get some pretty cool stuff. Like the key to the city of Nashville, Tennessee, given to Hayes on a goodwill tour of the South. There's a facsimile resolution of President Hayes and an original document case showing the way legislation and executive actions used to be. There's a Hayes plate and a saw gifted to him. You can also see his home out the window there. This is President Hayes' carriage. Back then the government did not cover transportation costs for the president, so he purchased it in 1877 for over $2,500 at the start of his term, and he would ride around DC in this stylish carriage. The carriage would also be used for President William McKinley when he visited Fremont. This is the memorial room at the original entrance to the library. A very grand chamber with a bust of President Hayes at the center. After the one-term presidency, he and the First Lady remained active in politics, advocating for federal education subsidies for all children, better prison conditions, and bringing attention to income disparities between the rich and poor. He said in 1886 that, quote, "Free government cannot long endure if property is largely in a few hands and large masses of people are unable to earn homes, education, and a support in old age." During his inaugural address, in the context of the election and compromise, he said that, quote, "He who serves his party best, who serves his country best." We all wish that were true. I must say, Ohio has probably done the best job with honoring its presidents with grand monuments and museums. This is a really spectacular chamber. In one of the two original rooms of the library, there is a marble portrait of Hayes. This is now the Hayes Family Gallery, And they have Fanny Hayes' dollhouses. This Victorian dollhouse was gifted to her in 1878. Rutherford and Lucy gave her this big dollhouse during her first Christmas at the White House. And this is a dollhouse of the Hayes home, which gives a miniature dissection of the rooms and layout, so I can give you a glimpse of what it's like inside, if only in tiny form. This case has many items of Colonel Webb C. Hayes, who himself had an illustrious military career and was instrumental in constructing this library. This Prussian-style helmet was worn by Webb. Webb did receive the Congressional Medal of Honor because he pushed through enemy lines alone at Vigan in the Philippines. Here are some women's uniforms from World War I. The first women enlisted into the Navy during the war, and they did generally receive the same benefits and responsibilities as men. The other room features an exhibit on the presidency, featuring presidents other than Hayes. At the center is a replica of the Resolute desk, the president's official desk that now sits in the Oval Office. It is also known as the Hayes desk, as it was first used by President Hayes in 1880 and has been used by every president since for official work, except for LBJ, Nixon, and Ford. It was a gift from Queen Victoria to President Hayes as a gift of goodwill and friendship. It was built from the oak timbers of the HMS Resolute, a British Arctic exploration ship that was abandoned in the Arctic in 1852. It was rediscovered and brought back to England in 1855, where it was eventually bought by Queen Victoria, broken up, and they made a most important desk out of it. It originally didn't have a door, this replica doesn't, but that was actually requested by FDR to conceal his leg braces. But it wasn't installed until after his death, though little John would famously make use of it. Behind the replica of the Resolute desk are the signatures of every president. President Hayes actually collected the signatures of all preceding presidents during his lifetime. So Webb and the library has continued that tradition. And these are the signatures from the more recent presidents. No Trump or Biden yet though. Here are some examples of White House crystal and stemware. They span from Jackson's days to Lincoln's to the Hayeses. These are pieces of Lincoln White House china, selected by Mary Todd during their time at the White House. These were among the damaged pieces that were going to be thrown out and destroyed, but Hayes decided to save them and bring them to Spiegel Grove. This is a bronze cast of the 1860 Leonard Volk plaster mold of Lincoln's right hand. You can see where he was gripping a piece of a broomstick to help keep his hand steady. It is believed that Lincoln cut off the chunk of broomstick with his pocket knife, and it's still in the real cast at the Smithsonian. That is the seal stamp used by President Lincoln. Awesome. Now these are amazing relics. The gloves worn by President Abraham Lincoln on the night of April 14th, 1865. He wore these to Ford's Theater, where he would be assassinated. Was not expecting to see these at the Hayes Museum. They also have a cloth fragment of the coat he wore to Ford's Theater the night he was assassinated. While the full coat can be seen at Ford's Theater, this swatch of cloth was given to President Hayes by the White House chief doorkeeper, who had originally received it from Tad Lincoln in 1865. This is the Grant desk, a secretary desk purchased by the White House in 1869 for the cabinet room during the Grant administration, and it was also used during the Hayes administration. Here's some more memorabilia, a 1940 FDR banner, an engraving of Old Tippecanoe, and a Nixon gold coin. There's some campaign buttons. So, the first presidential library and museum may well be one of the best. I still haven't been to most of them, but this was an amazing museum with a fantastic collection on display. Now let's go explore the rest of Spiegel Grove. This is the home of President Rutherford B. Hayes at Spiegel Grove. The original part of this home was constructed between 1859 and 1863 by Hayes' uncle, Sardis Burchard, as a summer home which he intended for Rutherford and his family to live in as well. Eventually in 1873, ownership fell to Rutherford, who made it his primary residence, although he would soon leave to live in Columbus for his third term as governor, and then of course to live at the Executive Mansion in Washington, D.C. It is a very stately and large home, which had grown to 31 rooms by the time the president died here. You can see that the home has a wraparound veranda, which Hayes really liked. The home was expanded many times. The president himself designed many of the additions. This location for the home was selected because of these woods. There are some very impressive and beautiful trees surrounding the home. The Hayeses actually named many of the trees and nailed plaques to them, which are still here. This is the Grover Cleveland hickory, named after President Grover Cleveland. And this old tree was living in 1776 when the Declaration of Independence was signed. Pretty incredible. Now, this presidential home sadly follows a trend of many that prohibits photography inside the home. I've ranted about this at other places, but that's a totally nonsensical policy and detrimental to the goal of education, so I am not allowed to show you the inside of the home. I did send them an email in advance inquiring about the possibility of filming, but they ignored me, so that's a bummer. Spiegel Grove was justly designated as a National Historic Landmark in 1963. President Rutherford B. Hayes is laid to rest here at Spiegel Grove. The graves of the President and First Lady are located within sight of their beloved home. Lucy Hayes passed away on June 25, 1889 from a stroke. The President was very saddened and wrote that, quote, "The soul had left Spiegel Grove." 3.5 years later, on January 17, 1893, the President died of a heart attack at age 70. His last words were, "I know that I'm going where Lucy is." President-elect Grover Cleveland and Ohio Governor William McKinley led the funeral procession from Spiegel Grove to Oakwood Cemetery in Fremont, where Lucy and the President were originally buried. They were reinterred here at Spiegel Grove in 1915 as the property was being developed. Their remains are located under this gravestone behind the big tombstone of Vermont marble. Their son, Webb C. Hayes, is also buried here, which is fitting since he was so instrumental in building the museum and turning this place into a public park and monument. It is a really nice gravesite located on a knoll where the President and First Lady would often picnic. I do have a goal of visiting all the President's graves, which makes 13 now, so quite a few more to go. Spiegel Grove is a wonderful tribute to the 19th President, who really isn't well known today at all. He's actually much more popular in Paraguay due to his involvement in a dispute between Argentina and Paraguay. His third-party decision in their conflict gave Paraguay about 60% of its current land. So this is along the Sandusky-Scioto Trail that was used by the natives and French hunters centuries ago. But here's another gate to the Spiegel Grove property. It is fairly sizable and you can walk around and stuff. Also, these were once the iron gates to the freaking White House. Right inside this gate is the William Henry Harrison oak. So Hayes gave this specific tree this name because he very much believed that William Henry Harrison camped under this very oak tree back during the War of 1812. General Harrison was in this area during that time, so it is very likely that he was around here. I don't know if he camped here, I don't know how Hayes knew that, but regardless, this is one tree named by a president for another president, and I'll admit, a short-lived president. I'm a bit uphill, but I think this plaque says the Harrison tree, something about it. Can't get the ice off. But yeah, it's the Harrison tree. The Hayeses started the tradition of the White House Easter egg roll, and every Easter they do one here on the lawn of Spiegel Grove. So that was the Rutherford B. Hayes Presidential Library, Museum, Spiegel Grove, and the Grave. This is a really great presidential site. The Museum and Presidential Library is really well done, and the whole site is just fantastic, well worth a visit. Again, very disappointed that you can't take pictures or video in Spiegel Grove. There's a lot of cool stuff to show you in there, and I'm mad they ignored my email, so that's not cool, and I hope you change your policy on that, because that's a very stupid rule. Anyways, if you like this video and know a bunch of other presidential sites, graves, museums, libraries, all sorts of stuff, so please go check out my other videos, and thanks for watching.